The sun hung low over the desert highway, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt as Sarah Martinez stumbled toward the weathered building ahead. Her torn dress clung to her trembling frame, dark stains marking where blood had dried on the fabric. Each step sent sharp pain through her bare feet, but terror drove her forward. The Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club's compound emerged from the heat haze like a mirage. Chrome gleamed from the dozen Harleys parked in perfect formation outside the clubhouse. The building itself looked fortress-like, with barred windows and steel doors that spoke of men who valued their privacy. Sarah had heard whispers about this place during her months on the streets. Some called the Iron Wolves dangerous outlaws. Others spoke of unexpected kindness from the leather-clad brotherhood. Right now, she didn't care about their reputation. She needed sanctuary from the nightmare pursuing her. The rumble of engines echoed behind her, growing closer. Her pursuers had found her trail again. Panic seized her chest as she broke into a desperate run, her lungs burning with each ragged breath. 3 bikers stood near the clubhouse entrance, their conversation halting as they noticed the approaching figure. Tank Morrison, the club's sergeant-at-arms, squinted through the fading daylight. His massive frame cast an imposing shadow, leather vest displaying patches earned through years of loyalty and brotherhood. "What the hell?" muttered Razor, adjusting his sunglasses as he watched the woman's frantic approach. The third man, Diesel, stepped forward slightly. Something about her desperation triggered an instinct he couldn't ignore. This wasn't some random trouble. This was someone running for their life. Sarah reached the edge of their territory and collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. Behind her, the sound of approaching engines grew louder, more threatening. "Please," she gasped, looking up at the 3 imposing figures. "They're coming for me." Tank Morrison had seen plenty of desperate people over his 15 years with the Iron Wolves. Drug addicts seeking fixes, debtors begging for more time, rivals attempting infiltration through sob stories. But something about this woman's terror felt genuine, raw in a way that cut through his usual skepticism. Sarah knelt in the dust, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. Blood trickled from a cut above her left eyebrow, and her clothes told a story of violence recently escaped. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands around a face that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. "Easy there," Diesel said, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man whose nickname came from his explosive temper. He crouched down to her level, noting the way she flinched at his movement. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here." Razor remained standing, his hand instinctively moving toward the knife on his belt. His survival instinct screamed caution. In their world, unexpected visitors often brought unwanted trouble. "Tank, we don't know what she's mixed up in." The sound of motorcycles grew closer, their engines revving with aggressive intent. Sarah's head snapped toward the noise, fresh terror flooding her features. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the clubhouse wall, as if she could disappear into the weathered wood. "They found me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the approaching rumble. "God, they found me." Tank's jaw tightened as he recognized the sound pattern. Multiple bikes, riding hard and fast. This wasn't a casual cruise down the highway. Someone was hunting, and they were closing in fast. The Iron Wolves had built their reputation on staying out of other people's business unless it directly threatened their brotherhood. But watching this woman cower in terror stirred something protective in Tank's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since his daughter's death 5 years ago. "Get inside," he commanded, his decision made in an instant that would change everything. The black motorcycles materialized from the desert heat like harbingers of violence. 5 riders dressed in dark leather, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors that reflected the dying sunlight. They rode in tight formation, engines snarling with barely contained aggression as they approached the Iron Wolves' compound. Sarah pressed herself deeper against the clubhouse wall, her entire body shaking as recognition flooded her features. These weren't random bikers. These were the men who had destroyed her life, who had taken everything she held dear and left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and memories that haunted her dreams. Tank stepped forward, positioning himself between the approaching riders and the terrified woman. His massive frame seemed to expand as he adopted a defensive stance, years of street fighting evident in the way he balanced his weight. Razor and Diesel flanked him automatically, the Brotherhood's protective instincts kicking in without conscious thought. The lead rider brought his bike to a stop 20 feet from the clubhouse entrance. He removed his helmet slowly, revealing a scarred face dominated by cold grey eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of the scene before him. Marcus Volkov had built his reputation on violence and intimidation, and his presence carried the weight of unspoken threats. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Marcus called out, his voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of Eastern European origins. "Beautiful day for a ride, wouldn't you say?" Tank's expression remained neutral, but his muscles coiled with tension. "Private property. You're not welcome here." Marcus smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "I'm looking for something that belongs to me. A woman. Dark hair, about 5'6", probably looking a bit worse for wear." His gaze swept the area methodically. "She has something I need back." Behind Tank, Sarah whimpered softly. The sound was barely audible, but Marcus's head turned toward it like a predator detecting wounded prey. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Tank replied evenly. "Now I suggest you turn around and head back where you came from." Marcus Volkov dismounted his bike with deliberate slowness, his movements calculated to project menace. His 4 companions remained mounted but ready, hands resting near weapons concealed beneath their leather jackets. The tension in the air grew thick enough to taste like the metallic charge before a thunderstorm. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus said, taking a step closer to the Iron Wolves. "The woman I'm looking for witnessed something she shouldn't have. Now she's confused, scared, making up stories about people who were only trying to help her." Tank's laugh held no humor. Funny how help these days leaves people bloody and running for their lives. Sarah's breathing became more ragged as she listened to the exchange. She knew Marcus's version of help intimately. She had seen what happened to people who crossed his organization, had watched friends disappear into unmarked graves in the desert. The USB drive hidden in her torn dress contained evidence that could destroy his entire operation, and he would kill anyone to get it back. Diesel shifted slightly, his hand moving to the pistol concealed under his vest. The movement was subtle, but Marcus caught it immediately. His smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp for a human mouth. "Gentlemen, I respect what you've built here," Marcus continued, gesturing toward the clubhouse. "The Iron Wolves have a reputation for being reasonable businessmen. I'm prepared to make this worth your while." He reached into his jacket slowly, producing a thick roll of cash. $5,000 for 10 minutes alone with the woman. No questions asked, no complications afterward. The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Tank's jaw worked silently as he processed the implications. 5,000 was serious money, enough to fund club operations for months, but something about Marcus's desperation told him the woman was worth far more than that to these men. "Not interested," Tank said finally. "Time for you to leave." Marcus's facade of civility began to crack. "I don't think you understand the situation here." The desert wind picked up, swirling dust around the 2 groups of men as they faced each other in the fading daylight. Marcus's patience was wearing thin, his polite mask slipping to reveal the predator beneath. He had built his criminal empire through calculated violence and intimidation, and he wasn't accustomed to being refused. "Let me be more direct," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The woman has stolen property that belongs to my organization. property worth considerably more than the small fortune I just offered you." Tank crossed his arms over his broad chest, the leather of his vest creaking with the movement. "Still not our problem." Behind him, Sarah fought to control her panic. She could feel Marcus's eyes searching for her, could sense his growing frustration with each passing second. The USB drive in her dress felt like it was burning against her skin, a small piece of plastic that contained enough evidence to bring down a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement. Razor stepped forward slightly, his hand now openly resting on his weapon. "You heard Tank. Time to ride." Marcus's companions shifted restlessly on their bikes, engines still running, ready for whatever their leader decided. The lead rider, a mountain of a man called Victor, cracked his knuckles audibly. The sound carried clearly in the desert air, a not-so-subtle threat. "I had hoped we could resolve this like civilized men," Marcus continued, pulling out his phone. "But if you insist on being difficult, I have other resources at my disposal." He speed-dialed a number, speaking rapidly in a language Tank didn't recognize. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds, but the implications were clear. Reinforcements were coming. Sarah's voice cut through the tension, barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the still air. "They killed my sister." The words hit Tank like a physical blow. He turned slightly, seeing the raw pain in Sarah's eyes, the grief that went deeper than physical wounds. "They killed Maria because she tried to help me get away." Tank's expression hardened as Sarah's words sank in. The death of innocence crossed a line that even the most hardened outlaws respected. He had seen enough violence in his life to recognize the difference between criminal business and pure evil, and Marcus Volkov was clearly operating in the latter category. "She's lying," Marcus said quickly, but his voice carried a note of desperation that undermined his words. "The woman is mentally unstable, probably on drugs. You can't trust anything she says." Sarah forced herself to stand, using the wall for support as she faced her tormentors. "Maria was trying to get me to the police station. They ran us off the road, dragged her out of the car." Her voice broke slightly. She begged them to let her go. She was only 19. Diesel's face went pale beneath his tan. He had a younger sister himself, and the thought of anyone harming her made his blood boil. "Tank," he said quietly, "we can't let them take her." Marcus sensed the shift in mood among the Iron Wolves and decided to change tactics. "Gentlemen, you're making a serious mistake. My organization has connections throughout this state. Law enforcement, judges, politicians. You interfere with my business, and I guarantee you'll regret it." Tank had heard similar threats before, usually from men who ended up face down in the desert. "Funny thing about threats," he said, stepping closer to Marcus. "They only work if people are afraid of you." "Uji." The sound of approaching vehicles echoed across the desert, but these weren't motorcycles. The rumble of heavy trucks grew louder, and Marcus smiled with renewed confidence. His reinforcements were arriving right on schedule. Sarah's face went white as she recognized the sound. "They're bringing the others," she whispered. "Tank, you don't understand what you're up against." But Tank was already moving, his hand gesturing toward the clubhouse. "Diesel, get her inside. Razor, wake up the others." As if summoned by his words, the clubhouse door opened and 3 more Iron Wolves emerged, drawn by the commotion outside. The clubhouse door swung wide as President Jake Reaper Sullivan stepped into the fading daylight, followed by 2 more members of the Iron Wolves. Reaper's presence immediately shifted the dynamic of the confrontation. At 52, he carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had survived 3 decades in the outlaw world through intelligence, loyalty, and strategic violence when necessary. His weathered face took in the scene quickly. Tank and his men facing down 5 hostile riders, a terrified woman pressed against the clubhouse wall, and the sound of approaching vehicles growing louder by the second. Reaper had built the Iron Wolves into one of the most respected clubs in the Southwest by knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. But something about this situation triggered his protective instincts. "What's the situation?" Reaper asked Tank, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man accustomed to making life-or-death decisions. "Woman's running from these assholes," Tank replied, without taking his eyes off Marcus. "They killed her sister, want to finish the job." Reaper's expression darkened. The Iron Wolves had their own code of honor, and murdering innocent women violated every principle they held sacred. He stepped forward, positioning himself beside Tank as a show of unified leadership. Marcus's confidence wavered slightly as he realized he was now facing the full leadership of the Iron Wolves. Reaper's reputation preceded him throughout the criminal underworld, and even Marcus knew better than to underestimate the man who had turned a small desert club into a formidable brotherhood. "Mr. Sullivan," Marcus said, attempting to regain his composure, "I'm sure we can reach a reasonable arrangement." "Doubt it," Reaper replied flatly. "See, we don't negotiate with child killers." The approaching vehicles were close now, their engines echoing off the desert hills. Sarah counted at least 3 trucks, each one carrying unknown numbers of Marcus's men. The Iron Wolves were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy with nothing to lose. "Last chance," Marcus called out, his facade of civility completely abandoned. "Hand over the woman and we'll leave peacefully." Reaper's answer came in the form of action rather than words. Reaper's hand signal was subtle but unmistakable to his brotherhood. Within seconds, the Iron Wolves had spread into defensive positions around the clubhouse entrance, each man drawing on years of experience in situations where violence was the only language their enemies understood. The approaching trucks crested the hill overlooking the compound, their headlights cutting through the gathering dusk like predatory eyes. Marcus's reinforcements had arrived, 3 black SUVs carrying enough firepower to level a small building. The vehicles spread out in a semicircle, effectively surrounding the clubhouse and cutting off most escape routes. Sarah watched in horror as armed men poured from the vehicles. She counted at least 15, all carrying assault rifles with the casual familiarity of professional soldiers. These weren't street thugs or amateur criminals. Marcus had brought military-grade muscle to retrieve what he considered his property. "This is your final warning," Marcus shouted, his voice carrying across the compound. "Return what was stolen, and no one else has to die today." Reaper stepped forward, his weathered hands empty, but his posture radiating deadly intent. "Counter offer," he called back. "You and your boys get back in those trucks and disappear. We'll pretend this conversation never happened." Marcus laughed, the sound harsh and without humor. "You're outnumbered 3 to 1, old man. Your little clubhouse isn't a fortress, and my men have enough firepower to turn this place into rubble." "Maybe," Reaper acknowledged, "but you'll be the first to die, and your boys know it." The standoff stretched taut like a wire ready to snap. Both sides knew that once shooting started, there would be no going back. The desert would claim more lives before the sun finished setting, and the survivors would carry the weight of this moment for the rest of their days. Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She stepped away from the wall, moving into the open space between the 2 groups. "Stop!" she called out, her voice stronger than it had been since her arrival. "This is about me. Let me end it." Sarah's movement into the open drew every weapon in her direction, but she continued forward with the desperate courage of someone who had already lost everything that mattered. The USB drive felt heavy in her torn dress, its weight disproportionate to its size, but enormous in its implications for everyone present. "Sarah, no!" Tank shouted, but she was already beyond his reach. Marcus's eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction as his quarry finally emerged from cover. "Smart girl. I knew you'd see reason eventually." But Sarah wasn't walking toward Marcus. Instead, she positioned herself directly between the two groups, her hands raised to show she carried no weapons. "I have what you want," she called out to Marcus, "but if you hurt these men, I'll destroy it right here." She reached into her dress and withdrew the small USB drive, holding it up where everyone could see. The device looked insignificant in the fading light, but Marcus's reaction confirmed its importance. His face went pale, and several of his men shifted nervously. "That drive contains evidence of your entire operation," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Police corruption, money laundering, the murders, everything." Reaper's mind raced as he processed this new information. The woman wasn't just a random victim. She was a witness to something big enough to bring down a criminal organization, valuable enough that Marcus would risk open warfare to silence her. "You're making a mistake," Marcus called out, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "That information is worthless without context, without someone alive to explain it." Sarah smiled grimly. "I already uploaded copies to 3 different news organizations. If I don't check in every 12 hours, they publish everything." The lie came easily, born from desperation and the need to buy time. In reality, she had barely escaped with her life and the original drive. But Marcus didn't know that, and the uncertainty was eating at him. Tank caught Reaper's eye and saw his own thoughts reflected there. The woman was playing a dangerous game, but she was also buying them leverage they desperately needed. "Seems like you've got a problem," Reaper called out to Marcus. The desert silence stretched between the two groups as Marcus processed Sarah's revelation. His carefully constructed criminal empire suddenly felt fragile, vulnerable to exposure by a woman he had underestimated. The USB drive in her hand represented years of careful planning and millions of dollars in illegal profits, all threatened by one witness who had refused to die quietly. Marcus's phone buzzed, and he answered it quickly, speaking in hushed tones to whoever was on the other end. His expression grew increasingly grim as the conversation progressed, and when he hung up, his confidence had visibly shaken. "Problem?" Reaper asked with dark satisfaction. Before Marcus could respond, the sound of approaching motorcycles echoed across the desert once again. But these engines had a different note, deeper and more powerful than the bikes Marcus's men rode. Sarah looked up hopefully as she recognized the distinctive rumble of American iron. 6 motorcycles crested the hill from the opposite direction, their riders wearing the colors of the Desert Serpents MC, a club that had maintained an uneasy alliance with the Iron Wolves for over a decade. The lead rider was Tommy "Snake" Rodriguez, a man whose reputation for violence was matched only by his loyalty to his friends. Snake brought his bike to a stop near Reaper, removing his helmet to reveal a scarred face dominated by intelligent dark eyes. "Heard you might need some backup," he said simply. Marcus's tactical advantage was rapidly disappearing. What had been a 3-to-1 numerical superiority was now approaching even odds, and the Desert Serpents were known for their willingness to escalate any conflict to its ultimate conclusion. "This doesn't concern you," Marcus called out to the new arrivals. Snake's laugh was harsh as desert wind. "Funny thing about Brotherhood, when someone threatens our friends, it becomes our business real quick." Sarah felt a surge of hope as she watched the 2 motorcycle clubs unite against their common enemy. These men barely knew her, had no obligation to risk their lives for a stranger, yet they were willing to stand between her and certain death. Marcus was rapidly running out of options, and everyone present knew it. Marcus's phone rang again, and this time his conversation was brief and heated. When he hung up, his face had gone ashen. Whatever news he had received was clearly not what he wanted to hear. "Trouble at home," Snake called out mockingly. Marcus's organization was built on fear and intimidation, but those tools were useless against men who had faced death so many times it had become an old acquaintance. The Iron Wolves and Desert Serpents had survived gang wars, federal investigations, and countless street battles through loyalty and brotherhood that Marcus's hired guns could never match. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "My organization reaches into every level of law enforcement in this state." Reaper stepped forward, his weathered face set in grim determination. "Then maybe it's time someone cleaned house." The standoff had reached its breaking point. Marcus's men were growing restless, their fingers tightening on weapons as they waited for orders. The bikers remained calm but ready, their years of experience in violent confrontations evident in their controlled movements. Sarah made another decision that would change everything. She walked directly toward Marcus, the USB drive held high above her head. "You want this so badly?" she called out. "Come and take it." But instead of offering the drive to Marcus, she turned toward Tank. "This contains evidence of police corruption going back 5 years. Detective Ray Morrison was taking money to look the other way while they trafficked women and children." Tank's face went white as he heard his brother's name. Ray had been killed in the line of duty 3 years ago, officially died a hero. The thought that his brother might have been dirty, might have contributed to the suffering of innocent people, hit Tank like a physical blow. "You're lying," Tank said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry. I know he was your brother, but he was going to testify, going to make things right. That's why they killed him." The revelation hung in the desert air like a thunderclap, changing everything once again. Tank's world tilted on its axis as Sarah's words sank in. His brother Ray had been his hero, the one member of the Morrison family who had chosen law enforcement over the outlaw life. Ray's death had devastated Tank, driving him deeper into the Brotherhood as he sought meaning in a world that seemed increasingly senseless. "Ray was trying to get out," Sarah continued, her voice gentle but firm. "He contacted the FBI, was going to turn over evidence about the corruption in his department. Marcus found out and had him killed, made it look like a gang shooting." Marcus's face contorted with rage as his carefully guarded secrets spilled into the open. "Shut up!" he screamed, raising his weapon towards Sarah. The movement triggered an instant response from both motorcycle clubs. Weapons appeared in experienced hands as 20-plus bikers prepared to unleash hell on Marcus's organization. The desert air crackled with tension as fingers tightened on triggers. But Tank moved faster than anyone expected. Years of grief and guilt transformed into pure fury as he launched himself toward Marcus, his massive frame covering the distance in seconds. The two men collided with bone-jarring force, rolling in the dust as they fought for control of Marcus's weapon. The fight was brief but vicious. Tank's rage gave him strength that even Marcus's military training couldn't match. Within moments, the criminal leader was pinned beneath Tank's bulk, his weapon scattered in the dirt. "You killed my brother," Tank growled, his hands around Marcus's throat. "Tank!" Reaper's voice cut through the red haze of vengeance. "We need him alive." Bah! The words penetrated Tank's fury just enough to stay his hands. Marcus gasped for air beneath him, his face purple from lack of oxygen. Around them, Marcus's men found themselves surrounded by bikers whose weapons never wavered. Sarah approached slowly, the USB drive still clutched in her hand. "There's enough evidence on here to bring down his entire network," she said. "But only if we can get it to the right people." Snake spat in the dust, assuming there are any right people left. The standoff had shifted completely. Marcus's men were outnumbered and outgunned, their leader captured and their mission failed. But Sarah knew the real battle was just beginning. The desert night had fallen completely, transforming the compound into a landscape of shadows and motorcycle headlights. Marcus lay bound with zip ties, his earlier arrogance replaced by the desperate calculation of a cornered predator. His men had surrendered their weapons without a fight once their leader was captured, but everyone knew this was only a temporary victory. Sarah sat on the clubhouse steps, the USB drive finally safe in Reaper's hands. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her exhausted and emotionally drained. Tank sat beside her, his massive frame somehow diminished by the weight of revelations about his brother. Ray was a good cop at the end, Sarah said quietly. He risked everything to try to make things right. Tank nodded slowly, processing the complex emotions of grief, pride, and anger that warred within him. How do you know all this? I was his informant, Sarah admitted. I worked for Marcus's organization, saw the corruption firsthand. When I tried to get out, Ray promised to protect me and my sister. Her voice broke slightly. He kept his promise as long as he could. Reaper approached, holding the USB drive up to catch the light. This really contains everything. Financial records, recorded conversations, video evidence, 5 years' worth of crimes that reach into the highest levels of state government. Sarah looked up at the Iron Wolves president. But getting it to honest law enforcement won't be easy. Marcus wasn't lying about having connections everywhere. Snake emerged from the shadows where he had been questioning Marcus's captured men. Good news and bad news, he reported. Good news is these idiots don't know anything useful. Bad news is Marcus has backup plans. More men coming, and they'll be here by dawn. The Brotherhood faced a critical decision. They could turn Sarah over to local law enforcement, but Marcus's corruption network made that a death sentence. They could try to smuggle her out of state, but his resources made escape unlikely. Or they could make a stand and fight a war they might not survive. There's another option, Sarah said quietly. Let me go back to him. The suggestion was met with immediate protests from every biker present, but Sarah continued. If I'm wearing a wire, if we can get him to confess on tape. Absolutely not, Tank said firmly. We don't sacrifice innocence. Reaper studied the woman who had stumbled into their lives and changed everything. What do you think we should do? Sarah's answer surprised them all. Sarah's proposal was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. She would return to Marcus voluntarily, wearing a recording device provided by the Iron Wolves technical expert, and attempt to get him to confess his crimes on tape. The plan required her to walk back into the hands of the man who had murdered her sister, trusting that the Brotherhood would be able to rescue her before Marcus realized what was happening. It's suicide, Tank said flatly. He'll kill you the moment he gets what he wants. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But it's the only way to get evidence that will hold up in court. Everything on that USB drive is circumstantial without someone to explain it, to provide context. Reaper paced the length of the clubhouse, his mind working through the tactical implications. Dawn was only hours away, and Marcus's reinforcements would arrive with the sunrise. They needed a solution that would end the threat permanently, not just postpone it. There's something else, Sarah continued. Marcus has been planning something big, a shipment coming through next week that will fund his operations for years. If we can stop that... Snake looked up from cleaning his weapon. What kind of shipment? Human trafficking. 50 women and children from Eastern Europe being moved through a network of safe houses before final placement. Sarah's voice hardened with determination. If we don't stop him, those people will disappear into a nightmare they'll never escape. The revelation changed everything once again. The Iron Wolves and Desert Serpents had many flaws, but they drew absolute lines when it came to harming children. The thought of Marcus profiting from such misery made their decision easier. "We end this tonight," Reaper declared. "All of it." As the first hints of dawn appeared on the eastern horizon, two motorcycle clubs prepared for a war that would determine not just their own survival, but the fate of countless innocent victims. Sarah had brought them more than just a plea for help. She had brought them a chance for redemption, a way to transform their outlaw status into something approaching heroism. The final confrontation was coming, and everyone present knew that not all of them would see another sunset. But sometimes, the most important battles are the ones where survival is less important than doing what's right. In the growing light of dawn, the iron wolves and desert serpents prepared to prove that brotherhood could triumph over corruption, that honor could exist even in the darkest corners of society. The war for Sarah's life and the lives of countless others was about to begin.